A woman asks her partner to help with her broken car in the rain, dressed in rags, to see if he'll still care when the situation is inconvenient. The sky growled as thick clouds rolled over the town of Crestville, a sleepy suburb nestled between foggy hills and winding roads. Elena Carter, 28, stood at her apartment window watching rain slash against the glass. Her long auburn hair was tied in a Bessie bun and her hands trembled slightly, not from the cold but from anticipation. Tonight she was going to test something deeper than love. Her boyfriend Mason Reed, 32, a charming and successful architect, had been a rock in her life, yet doubts gnawed at her heart. Would he still care if she were stripped of elegance, beauty, and convenience? What if she were broken? Just like a rundown car by the roadside, with trembling fingers she texted Mason, "Hey, car broke down. It's pouring. Can you come get me near the old mill?" Then she changed. She slipped into stained jeans, an oversized torn sweatshirt, and beat-up sneakers. Her makeup-free face looked pale under the harsh bathroom light. By the time she reached the old mill, wind howled and rain poured in sheets. She parked her reliable sedan on the shoulder and popped the hood to fake a problem. Would he come? And if he did, what would he see? Elena clutched her arms to her chest, the wind slicing through her soaked clothes like a blade. The road was deserted, save for flickering streetlights and the occasional roar of thunder overhead. Her teeth chattered, not just from the cold but from the weight of her decision. She had known Mason for 2 years. He had seen her at her best, glowing in evening gowns, laughing at dinner parties, curling beside him on sleek leather sofas. But had he truly seen her soul, or had she been just another pretty fixture in his curated life? As the minutes dragged, doubt crept in. Her phone buzzed, a message. "Mason, are you serious? In this weather? I just got out of the shower." Her heart sank a little, but she held on. Maybe he'd come anyway. Maybe he was just annoyed. This test wasn't about instant heroism. It was about whether he'd show up despite inconvenience. The headlights of a passing car blinded her momentarily. Not Mason. She wiped rain from her eyes and tried not to cry. Each minute felt like an hour. Would he come, or would this storm reveal the truth about their love? As Elena hunched beneath the creaking oak by the roadside, her mind spiraled into the past. She remembered the early days, how Mason would drive 3 hours just to see her after work, how he'd hold her hand like she was his anchor in a storm. But lately, things had changed. Their once effortless conversations turned into polite exchanges. He missed dates, blamed deadlines, and grew impatient with the smallest inconveniences. She feared she'd become background noise in the life he was building. This test wasn't meant to trap him. It was a plea to know where she stood. Lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating her pale face. The storm was worsening. A rational voice in her head screamed, "This is crazy, just go home," but her heart silenced it. If Mason truly loved her, not for how she looked, not for what she added to his social image, but for who she was, then he'd come. He'd come even if it was raining, even if she looked like a stranger, even if it was hard. This wasn't about a car, it was about character. And storms, after all, had a way of washing away illusions. 37 minutes after her text, Elena saw them, headlights small and distant at first, then growing brighter as they turned the corner. Her heart fluttered like a nervous bird. She stood slowly, unsure whether to feel hope or dread. The car slowed. It was Mason's silver SUV. She braced herself. The SUV stopped beside her. The window rolled down and Mason leaned out, his hair slightly damp, his jaw clenched. "What the hell are you doing out here?" he snapped. Elena flinched. "I told you my car broke down," she said quietly. Wiping rain from her face, he stared at her, confused. "Why are you dressed like that? Are you trying to get mugged?" "No," she replied, voice trembling, "just wasn't thinking." He looked irritated, glancing at his phone, then back at her. "Get in the car before you catch pneumonia." She hesitated. The way he looked at her, it wasn't worry, it was inconvenience. She was a disruption, a problem, and yet he'd come. That had to mean something, didn't it? Elena slid into the passenger seat, water dripping from her sleeves onto Mason's pristine leather interior. He winced. "You're soaking wet," he muttered, reaching behind her to pull out a towel. He tossed it into her lap without looking. "Thanks," she murmured. The windshield wipers beat a steady rhythm as the SUV rolled forward. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. The silence between them was louder than the storm outside. Mason broke it first. "Why didn't you call roadside assistance? I wanted you," she said softly. He raised an eyebrow. "You wanted me to drive through a storm instead of calling a service?" Elena turned to him, searching his face for warmth. "Wouldn't you do that for someone you love?" He didn't answer immediately. His hands tightened on the wheel. "I just think there were smarter ways to handle it." Her heart ached. This wasn't the Mason who used to sing badly in traffic to make her laugh. This wasn't the man who danced with her under fairy lights in the backyard just because. Something had changed, and now she feared she already knew the truth. As they reached her apartment, Mason pulled into the lot and turned off the engine. Elena didn't move. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice barely audible over the ticking of the cooling engine. Mason leaned back, sighing. "What now?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't blink them away. "The car isn't broken. I staged it. I wanted to see if you'd show up when it wasn't easy." Mason blinked, stunned. "You lied. What kind of twisted game is that, Elena?" "It wasn't a game," she said firmly, though her voice shook. "I needed to know if you'd be there for me when I wasn't polished or perfect. When it was cold, wet, hard, inconvenient." He ran a hand through his hair, laughing bitterly. "And this was your solution? A test?" She looked down. "I had to know if your love had conditions." He stared at her, the silence suffocating. Then he opened the door. "I don't need this drama. I came, didn't I?" He got out, slamming the door behind him. Elena sat alone in the SUV, the engine off, the rain still falling. Mason's footsteps faded into the building. He hadn't looked back. Her hands trembled on the towel. She pressed it to her face and sobbed. Yes, he came, but not with kindness, not with the heart she remembered. He saw her as a burden tonight, not a beloved. The test hadn't revealed a villain. It had exposed a drift, a detachment, a quiet erosion of what once was love, and in doing so it showed her what she refused to admit for months. Mason's care had limits. There was no room in his world for mess or vulnerability. When the storm came, he showed up, but not with shelter, only with complaint. And now she had her answer. It wasn't the one she hoped for, but it was real, and sometimes truth hurts more than lies ever could. Elena eventually stepped out of the car, her legs weak beneath her as she made her way to the apartment. Her clothes clung to her like the burden of realization. As she entered the dim hallway, echoes of her wet shoes filled the space, each step punctuated by the aching knowledge that something had fractured tonight, something she couldn't glue back together. Inside her apartment, silence greeted her. No call from Mason, no text, just the low hum of the refrigerator and the patter of rain against her windows. She peeled off the soaked sweatshirt, changed into dry clothes, and wrapped herself in a blanket on the couch. It wasn't just physical cold she was fighting, it was the chill of disillusionment. The idea had sounded simple. Test if Mason's love could survive discomfort. She didn't expect perfection, but she hoped for compassion. Instead, she saw irritation, judgment, and detachment. Her heart had always clung to memories. The man who once warmed her with a hoodie on a cold beach night, who brought soup when she was sick. Where had he gone? Maybe the question wasn't where he went. Maybe it was why she stayed so long after he left emotionally. The next morning, sunlight poured through the blinds, but it brought no warmth. Elena stared at the ceiling, numb. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from her best friend, Talia. "You okay? I saw Mason's story. Looked like you were soaked." Elena hesitated, then typed, "Can I come over?" 20 minutes later, she was wrapped in another blanket, this time on Talia's couch, sipping hot tea. "You did what?" Talia asked, eyes wide. "I pretended my car broke down. I wore rags. I wanted to see if he'd show up, see how he'd treat me when I wasn't convenient." Talia set her cup down slowly. "That's bold, but I get it." Elena waited for judgment, but Talia offered empathy instead. "Honestly, you deserve to know. It's not about tricks, it's about truth. If someone only loves the polished version of you, that's not love, that's performance." Tears welled in Elena's eyes. "He said I was dramatic, that I made a mess of everything." Talia leaned forward. "That mess, it showed you everything you needed to see. And girl, it's better to find out now than 10 years into a life where you have to pretend everything's always okay." Elena nodded. Slowly, something inside her began to settle. Later that evening, Elena sat alone again, the apartment still and heavy. Her phone buzzed, shattering the quiet. A message from Mason. "I don't understand what you were trying to prove. You made me look like a jerk. You manipulated the situation." She stared at the screen, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. This was the version of Mason she feared was real. The one who didn't reflect, didn't consider her emotions, only how her actions made him feel. Elena typed back, "I wasn't trying to embarrass you. I needed to know if you'd show up for me when it wasn't easy. You came, but you didn't really see me. You saw an inconvenience." Seconds later, he responded, "That's not fair. I'm not a villain because I don't want to play these games." Her heart dropped. Even now, he didn't get it. This wasn't about games, it was about partnership. She didn't reply. Instead, she turned off her phone and sat in the quiet. Sometimes the loudest answer is silence, the space where love should speak but doesn't. The following morning, Elena rose with a clarity she hadn't felt in months. She cleaned her apartment, brewed coffee, and opened her journal. The one she used before life became all about work and appearances. Page after page, she poured out the tangled emotions. Love turned distant, warmth turned cold, laughter replaced with silence. It hurt, but the truth always did before it healed. She wasn't angry anymore. She was free. Elena realized her test wasn't just about Mason, it was about herself. She had spent too long shrinking parts of who she was to keep someone else's version of love alive. Now she knew better. She wanted a love that showed up in storms, not with irritation but with heart. Someone who could face the mess and still choose her, not despite it but because of it. She closed her journal, took a deep breath and smiled faintly. For the first time in a long while she didn't feel broken, she felt whole. That afternoon Mason showed up at her door unannounced. He looked composed but defensive, holding a gift bag and wearing a practiced smile. "Thought I'd bring peace offerings," he said. "Your favorite pastries." Elena opened the door but didn't move aside to let him in. He blinked. "You're not going to invite me?" "No," she said gently. "Not today," he frowned. "Come on, Elena, you overreacted. I came for you." "That should count for something." "It did," she nodded. "It showed me that you can show up, but how you acted once you got there, that showed me something even more important." He looked away, frustration flickering. "So that's it," she gave a small bittersweet smile. "It has to be." Mason stood frozen for a moment, then turned and left without another word. As his footsteps disappeared down the hall, Elena closed the door and leaned against it. No tears, no regrets, just peace. The storm was over, and she had found her way back to herself. The days that followed Mason's final visit were eerily quiet, but not in the way that used to haunt Elena. This silence felt different, calm, clean, and filled with possibility. It was the sound of something ending, yes, but also of something beginning. For the first time in a long while, she had no one else's expectations to meet, no unspoken pressure to act right or look perfect. She could be herself, fully and unapologetically. She spent time reconnecting with old hobbies, reading novels that made her heart race, painting abstract pieces just for fun, walking in the rain without worrying about her hair. At first it felt foreign, but slowly it felt like coming home. Elena also realized she wasn't angry at Mason anymore. He wasn't a villain. He was just someone who couldn't meet her where she was going, and that was okay. Letting go didn't have to mean war. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away, not because you don't care, but because you finally care about yourself more, and Elena was finally ready to move forward. One evening, Elena poured a glass of wine and sat on her balcony, the sky pink with sunset. She opened her journal and wrote something she hadn't dared to before. "What do I want, not in a man but in me?" For too long her identity had been entangled with what she brought to others. She realized she had measured her worth by how needed or desirable she was. But what if her worth was intrinsic, not dependent on who stood beside her? She listed things that truly made her happy: deep conversations, acts of service, creative expression, and meaningful silence. She wanted to be with someone someday who didn't just tolerate her mess, but understood it. Someone who didn't see vulnerability as weakness. But most importantly, she wanted to love herself enough to never have to test someone again to prove their love, because real love would never make her doubt. It would feel like peace, and now she knew what that felt like, because she was beginning to find it within. 2 weeks later, at a local bookstore cafe, Elena sat with a novel in one hand and a latte in the other. The shop was cozy, filled with warm lighting, potted plants, and quiet classical music. She didn't expect to meet anyone, but that's when life often surprises you. "Is this seat taken?" a voice asked. She looked up to see a man mid-30s, soft eyes, holding a poetry book and smiling politely. "No, go ahead," she replied. They sat in companionable silence for a while. Then he glanced at her book. "I read that last year. The ending wrecked me," she laughed. "Then I guess I should brace myself." His name was Daniel. He worked at a nonprofit. Their conversation unfolded easily, like leaves in spring. There were no pretenses, just two people being real. As she left that day, he didn't ask for her number. He just said, "Hope we bump into each other again." And surprisingly, that felt perfect. Elena didn't rush into anything. She took her time. Weeks passed before she ran into Daniel again. This time they exchanged numbers, then stories, then long walks around the city. There were moments she wanted to test him, pretend to be someone else, fake a situation to see how he'd react. But then she remembered, that kind of love is built on fear, not trust. And Elena didn't want to be afraid anymore. Instead, she chose honesty. She told Daniel about her past, about the broken car test, about the storm and what it revealed. He listened. He didn't judge. He just nodded and said, "Sounds like you were trying to protect your heart." "I get it," she smiled. "But I don't want to live that way anymore." Daniel reached for her hand. "Then don't. Let's build something where we never have to question the weather." And just like that, something shifted. This wasn't about a grand test, it was about quiet truth, and she was finally ready to live it. Exactly 1 year later, rain fell again on Crestville. Not as fierce, not as cold, but enough to remind Elena of the night that changed everything. She and Daniel walked through the park holding hands under a shared umbrella. "Do you ever think about that night?" he asked gently. "Every time it rains," she smiled. "But not with sadness anymore. That storm didn't just end something, it cleared the path for everything that followed." He paused under a tree, looked at her, and said, "You're the most courageous woman I've met, not for what you did that night but for what you chose after." Elena leaned into him, her heart warm. Rain no longer scared her. She didn't need to test the weather or people anymore, because now she had someone who didn't just arrive in the storm, he danced with her in it. That night Elena sat by her window again, journaling by candlelight. She titled her page, "What I've Learned." She wrote, "Love shouldn't need costumes or tests. If you feel unsure, the answer is often already there. Vulnerability is not weakness, it's the doorway to intimacy. Walking away from someone is sometimes walking toward yourself. Real love shows up with kindness, not obligation." She closed the journal and kissed the cover. The girl who once stood alone in the rain was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew her worth and wouldn't trade it for convenience or empty promises. And she was ready for all the love the world had to give, starting with her own. Months later, on a sunny afternoon, Daniel knelt beside Elena under the same oak tree from that stormy night. Not because they planned it that way. Life, it seemed, had a sense of poetry. "Elena Carter," he said, holding a simple ring, "I don't want to pass your tests. I want to walk through life with you, with all its messes and miracles. Will you marry me?" Tears brimmed in her eyes, not from doubt but from overwhelming peace. "Yes," she whispered, "with all my heart." There was no thunder, no performance, just love, honest, flawed, and beautifully human. And this time Elena wasn't waiting for someone to prove they'd stay, she already knew. Because this love didn't show up to impress, it showed up to stay. From the night she faked a car breakdown in the rain to the day she said yes under clear skies, Elena's journey was never about testing someone else, it was about discovering herself. She had once believed love needed to be proven through struggle. But real love, she learned, reveals itself in the ordinary. A shared umbrella, a warm meal, a listening heart. The broken car wasn't the test, her heart was. And she passed. Now she lived not in fear of storms but in gratitude for the one that opened her eyes. So when the rain came again, she smiled, not because it was easy, but because she was strong. And in that strength she found love that never needed testing again. If this story touched you, reminded you of your worth, or made you believe in love that stays through the storm, don't forget to subscribe for more heartfelt stories. Let the rain fall. We'll weather it together.